All right, everybody, welcome into KBO Chats Live. I'm your host, Sam Pasco, alongside Eric Halterman, and we are talking everything KBO. It should be an interesting week of KBO action. We have a lot of things to talk about here. The KBO world has been essentially turned upside down. If you look at the standings and the power rankings, which we'll get into, Dino's not number one, Eagles not number 10. Good thing though, no rain. Only one rain out last week. And as such, a lot of teams playing games were a little tired in that last Sunday game. And yeah, we'll get into some other notes as we go along. Eric, how are you feeling right now with some KBO action?
A little bit frazzled. Had some technical difficulties there. Thanks for people sticking by. Good old-fashioned turn it off and back on again seems to have worked. We've also got a special guest, namely my dog, in the room with me today.
Oh,
We'll see if she disrupts anything. If I have any particularly bad takes, she'll start barking probably.
a little tiger, a little Kia tiger, if you will. We'll have to see. We'll talk about them. As always, comments are open. We want to talk about what you guys want to talk about as well, breaking down each series. Josh, welcome in. Barry, welcome back as well. So let's dive right into it, starting with some power rankings. Eric, these are your power rankings, and I tweeted this out when I saw who you put at number one, the Kiwoom Heroes. You've been dropping the dinos, but I don't know, just this week it hit different. What have you seen in this Heroes team that makes them deserve this number one spot?
I mean, they're only half a game back to the Dinos at this point, and they're outplaying pretty much everybody for a while. Um, Mainly, I mean, they took the lead last week. I'd already moved them ahead of the Dinos because the Dinos have been struggling for a bit, and the Dinos aren't turning things around. It's a really key two-game series between the Heroes and Dinos coming up. Could see the Dinos right back in number one by the end of the week if they can win that. But the Heroes, they've just outplaying everybody. 14 wins in their last 18. Good time to be facing a tough part of the stretch. Yeah, they do some of everything. They've stayed consistent, I think, for longer than the other good teams. They did have a pretty poor stretch earlier, but it's been quite a while, and they're doing well on the offensive side of the ball. Their starting pitching's good too, even without Jokic right now. So they've got to do some of everything. We'll see, though. Again, Dinos can beat anybody. We've got a two-game set here. Could definitely vault the Dinos back to number one, but the way they've been playing lately, you got to favor the Heroes, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so. When you look at this Heroes team overall, we saw them stumble a little bit. Taylor Motter, that bat, not really a factor. They cut him. Foreign players, really great with Jokic, but then not even there with Brigham. And now they just seem to be putting together this number one spot, if you will. Was a little foreshadowed with that winning streak back in June, and they've officially captured that number one spot for 2 weeks in a row. In terms of offense, they got that great upgrade in Ashton Russell not that long ago, but yet he is not your DFS name to know. And I believe you also mentioned Mel Rojas Jr. in the same sentence as you do this guy. Tell me how good is Jung Ho Lee for this Kiwoom Heroes team?
Well, he's the second best hitter in the league if you go by OPS. He does everything. Wasn't a power hitter before this year, but was an excellent contact hitter. I think 350 or above for his first 3 years, or if not quite 350, quite close to it. Never hit more than 6 homers, but this year, his age 21 season, he's breaking out, and he's already got more than double that. So yeah, he's one of those excellent contact hitters who doesn't have power when he's young, but when a guy swings that well and adds some strength as his body matures, you start to see him turn into a decent power hitter too. And that's going to be, I think, there's no reason to see him slowing down. I think he's been close to this good and everything except the power for quite a while. So he's as good as anybody non-Rojas division right now.
I like that. Mel Rojas Jr. has been holding on to the MVP, but now it's nice to see Kiwoom have their own mini Rojas, as Rojas Jr. himself was actually a little cold last week. We got a question here by Dress, and just speaking about that first place spot, the big reason for KBO fans who are new to the league is the first place spot. You get to buy all the way to the championship. That's like you win the regular season, you are in the Super Bowl. The next game you are playing is that big one. Eric, I don't know if you know the historical advantage here, but I would imagine it'd be something pretty big. I don't know if the Bears have it last. Did they finish first last year? What do you think about this question?
Yeah, so the Bears they finished tied with the Wyverns of all teams. People who started following the KBO this year are probably surprised about that. They did lose Kwang Young Kim to the St. Louis Cardinals and just got old in general. But they were the better team for most of the regular season before the Bears went on a charge and caught them. And they finished tied, but the Bears had that number 1 seed on tiebreakers. The Heroes, who were the 3 seed, beat the Wyverns in I don't know what they call it, the semifinal, the second to last playoff round, before the Bears then did sweep in the Korea series. It looks like only 2 times, if I'm reading this right, only twice since 2002 has the top team not won, although 2 of those times did come in the last 5 years. So, yeah, historically, it's a huge advantage. Recently, it's an advantage, but not quite as significant of one. I don't know what would have changed that would have made that not true. But basically, you got to consider the regular season winners heavy favorites.
Yes, that bye is huge. But with this COVID year, we don't know what's really gonna happen here because the beginning of the season was thrown off, no All-Star break. So a lot of factors we'll have to see what comes together. But the Heroes, not technically in that number 1 spot in terms of standings right now. That is still the Dinos, but the Heroes very close, and we will talk about their chances to actually secure that KBO standing spot, not just the power ranking spot. So moving down, you got the LG Twins. Dinos nowhere in sight. Well, they're number 3. But at number 2, you bumped the Twins all the way up from number 5. They did have an impressive sweep of the Dinos, but is that really enough for you to really say that they're the second best team in the entire league?
I would be surprised if the Dinos reclaim that spot this week if they have a good week, but the Dinos have won just 4 of their last 11 games. Meanwhile, the Twins have gone 17-7 over the last month. And I just couldn't put the Twins below the Dinos considering they just swept them easily too, 29-13 over that 3-game series. And they're only 3 games back in the standings now too. It just didn't feel like I could justify keeping the Dinos higher than them any longer based on that. Again, because they just crushed them straight up 3 games in a row. The Dinos, they just aren't playing like we're used to seeing lately. And really, it's actually been an extended stretch. At this point, they were basically riding the early lead. They haven't expanded that lead in a while, and now it's been shrinking for quite some time. They were 18 games over 500 all the way back on June 9th. That's over 2 months ago, and they're 18 games over now. So they played exactly 500 ball over their last 50 games, which, going by that, maybe I should have them even lower. I'm going to keep them at least at 3 because they were so dominant early and then stayed pretty good for quite a while. But again, they've been a 500 team for 50 full games, so I think there's no reason to treat them as the clear favorites like we were doing for most of the year. Losing Chang Mo-Koo is a big thing there. They had a shallow rotation, and now he's out for who knows how long with forearm issues, which is never good. So when you take one of their strengths and take one of the best players away from that group, you could see what's happening. I mean, they have not been a good team for quite some time.
Yeah, when you talk about that pitching staff too, it was looking solid with the big 3, but when you subtract basically all 3 guys, Chang Mo-Koo out with injury, Drew Rosinski trending in the wrong direction, Mike Wright not a real ace. So yeah, when you add that with the injuries, they start to falter a little bit, and now we see them falling accordingly in the power rankings here. Barry, though, talking about the Twins being very balanced, they do a lot of things well. Why weren't we seeing them a little higher, for the past couple months then? Why are they just now coming on? Because we saw Roberto Ramos start great, but then not really do anything. What's clicking right now for this Twins team?
Right, I think it's just a lot of guys figuring things out at once. Ramos is still not all the way back to what he was, but he's at least usable again. Yun-Sung Chae, who I highlighted as the name to know this time, he was so bad that they sent him down in, I guess it was probably mid-July, early July. But since he's come back, hitting .432 with 30 RBI in 17 games, obviously it's a bit of lucky circumstance contributing to that number, but he's been on fire. He was their number 3 hitter, I think, early in the year. Not a top-tier star, but a very good outfielder. They got Kim Jong-Lee back. He was out for the first couple months with injury. Their pitchers are playing better. Tyler Wilson and Casey Kelly were both pretty mediocre, but they've been trending towards where you want over the last couple months. So it's a mix of health and just a bunch of guys coming out of slumps at the same time. I kept them quite low even at the start of this recent run because they were still just beating bad teams, but they're beating good teams now. This recent stretch, they've won series against the Bears, Dinos, and 2 against the Tigers. So their issue where they were only beating up on bad teams and really struggling against the good teams seems to be over. So I think I'm back to treating them as a legitimate contender at this point.
And like you said, I like that pitching staff now. Casey Kelly, Tyler Wilson, maybe looking a little better than Mike Wright and Drew Rosicki at the moment. We'll see how long that lasts. Moving down the power rankings, we see number 4, the KT Wiz, number 5, the Doosan Bears, and number 6, the Kia Tigers. So starting with the Wiz here, they had a really interesting series with the Bears. What did that tell us anything we didn't know about the Wiz, about their offense?
I mean, we know both of those are generally one-dimensional pitching-heavy teams, though it didn't actually turn out that way. It's generally a pretty medium to low-scoring series. Looks like teams they won that series 14-11, and they won 2 games to 1. So it's tight. I think not much separates those two teams. The Bears are still ahead in the standings, but they've been below 500 over a 41-game stretch. As I noted there, they've been very mediocre for quite some time, whereas the Wiz have one of the best records dating back for quite a long time. They were quite bad early record-wise, but they had a positive run differential even when they were struggling, which indicated that they were going to turn things around, and they definitely have. So I wouldn't say they're definitively better than the Bears, but since they just beat them 2 out of 3, and since they're quite close, it felt correct to put them ahead. Yeah, 13 games over 500 over the last 2 months. And again, compare that to the Dinos, who have been a 500 team for a similar stretch. So they've been playing as well as anybody.
Yeah, and the big thing with these two teams has been that pitching, that question mark there. The Bears are going to be without Chris Flexen until September. That was the notable thing coming from Doosan. KT, I don't really know what you have long-term with William Cuevas and Despani, if they're really going to be championship caliber starters. But if it does come down to a pitching duel, do you see the Wiz still having the edge in terms of pitching, or do you think the Bears with Alcantara have the edge?
I think Alcantara is the best pitcher between the two teams, and Flexen, I think, is as good as Despaigne, if he's the same when he comes back. But the back end, the Bears have really just had no one emerge from that back end. I will talk about Wonju Choi later. It's not a ton there. Whereas the Wiz, I did note Hyunjin So. He's not somebody I'm generally super excited about, but he's only allowed 5 earned runs over his last 5 starts. 18-year-old rookies could be figuring things out in the second half of his debut season. So if they're getting something from him, they desperately need somebody to step up and be a legitimate number 3. But if they get something there, that could help them in a playoff series, because the Bears really are going to be quite shaky after those top 2, assuming they even get a top 2. We'll see when Flexen's back.
Yeah, Flexen, definitely going to need him to come back and help out that Bears pitching staff that is quite thin, which we will get to, like you said. So moving down, the Kia Tigers at 6, Lotte Giants at 7. I'm surprised you moved my Kia Tigers only up to 6. Yes, they played the Wyverns, but they did sweep. So I'm surprised they're not maybe in more consideration for the number 5 spot, because they do hold that in the standings right now.
Yeah, they're not far behind at all. It didn't feel like dropping the Bears too far, but it's something I could see changing next week if the Bears continue to struggle. The Tigers, though, they were struggling for a bit until they swept the Wyverns, and how much credit do you give them against the Wyverns? So I'd need a bit more from them to be convinced. I think they're going to remain a bubble team for quite some time. Big week for them this week, or a big week plus, really. They've got the Twins, then the Dinos, then the Heroes, then the Bears. So it doesn't get much tougher than that. So it's a real make or break stretch for them.
Yeah, who just was pretty much coming off of this stretch was the Lotte Giants. Can you give us an update on how they've been doing in terms of that threatening bubble team that could snag that playoff spot from Kia?
Yeah, they didn't excel to 2-3 against Dinos and Heroes, and they've got 4 against the Bears coming up. But it's a good time to be playing the Bears. They've been quite mediocre for quite some time. So they've got a chance if they can take 3 out of 4 in this 4-game series. It's a weird 2-game home and home split thing between the Giants and Bears. Wouldn't count the Giants out. They've stuck in it longer than I expect. Still not a ton on that pitching side other than Straley, but he's, I think, pretty clearly the best pitcher right now. With Chang Mo Koo out, he's second to Chang Mo Koo in basically everything. And with Koo out for who knows how long, Koo's probably about to fall out of the qualified pitcher category, which means Straley's about to be top in essentially everything, which is going to help a ton if they do finish 5th, because it's a very short playoff series, wildcard series between 5 and 4. I believe it's a 3-game series, but the 4th seed starts with a 1-0 lead. So if the Giants would have to, if they sneak into the 5th spot, they'd have to win 2 in a row against whoever's in 4th. But Straley gives them a great chance at equaling things. So they're going to keep fighting. I'm not sure they're going to stick there at the end. But again, they were so bad last year. 24 and a half games out of the playoffs. So the fact that they're only a game or 3 right now is a pretty remarkable achievement. So anything they do at this point, their season's already a success.
They've already won, and they have probably the MVP pickup in terms of foreign players with Dan Straley, them signing him away from a minor league contract here in the States. One thing with Kia Tigers, we'll talk about Aaron Brooks more, but is that pitching staff still something that is one of the best in the league? Is that something you still really respect in this Tigers team, or is that maybe fallen off a bit?
Well, so they're still second overall in runs allowed, but some of the individual guys, Ki Young Im, one of the reasons I really liked their pitching staff is that Ki Young Im was emerging from being a very shaky back-end guy to looking like a solid number 3-ish, but he went on such a poor stretch. What was it, a 8.59 ERA over his last 5 starts that he's been sent to the Futures League. So losing him, now it's really just Gagnon and Brooks, followed by Hyunjung Yang, who again was, we've talked about him in the past. He was number 3 in MVP voting last year and should be the best pitcher in the league now that Josh Lindblom is back in the States. But he hadn't been close to that. He's been a little bit better lately. He can definitely be a solid number 3 or more with those 2 Americans. So there's a chance they still got a top 3 that can compete with anyone. But I liked them a lot because they had at least 4 that I really trusted, and now it doesn't seem like they're going to have more than 3. So that is definitely a blow.
A little concerning with that Tigers pitching staff. Now, as we look towards the bottom of the power rankings here, the Samsung Lions, Hanwha Eagles, and the SK Wyverns. Wyverns were swept by the Tigers, who we were just talking about, so that makes sense for them at that number 10 spot. But the Eagles actually began the week with a win and actually ended the week with a win. Is this team maybe definitely building for 2021, but at least looking more competitive and maybe could give a team an upset and maybe split one of these series coming up in the 2-game format?
I mean, they could definitely split a 2-game series because all you have to do there is win 1 game, but they still haven't had a single week where they've had a record above 500. That's not what you want. They're kind of playing like a normal bad team now, not like the Eagles. So that's enough to move them up to 9. I wouldn't say that they're a whole lot better than the Wyverns. I just moved them up 2 weeks ago, and the Wyverns didn't do anything to reclaim that 9 spot. So it's really not much from either of those 2 teams. It's nice that they're playing each other tonight, which means the other 4 games should be close.
Yes, we'll get to the games as soon as we finish up here with the power rankings. And with that, before we move to finish up and talk about the Lions, Chad Bell had one of his best starts on the year. Is he finally figuring it out, or is it just too late for him?
It's going to take more than one, but it's also emblematic of how thin that Eagles roster is that I had to highlight him. Definitely not excited, but he's had 2 of 3 decent starts now. I think the one in between was still quite bad. But man, if he could even pitch, like a mid-4 ERA guy, that would be open for them based on what he's been. I think his ERA is still above 7. Just barely. So if they can get him to be like a meh, that's a win. So he might be there. It's been elbow issues for him throughout the year, and you just kind of never know. He's made a couple trips to the injured list. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it doesn't. It's hard to tell. But it's the closest thing to encouraging signs that we've seen from him in a while. So I might not automatically list him as a player to stack against the next time out. He's at least up to that level.
I'd say Ricardo Pinto has probably taken over that role as worst foreign pitcher in the KBO. But moving on, someone that you would not, hope to be met, and a team that maybe had a little higher expectations, at least about halfway through the season, was the Samsung Lions, now sitting at number 8, 2 weeks in a row. They're the only non-team that's not named the Eagles or the Wyverns with a negative average run margin. What's going on with the Lions here? Are they just bad now?
I think they're probably mostly just falling back to their talent level. This is where they were early in the year. It was always kind of a surprise when they were legitimately in the playoff mix. They've been banged up too. They're obviously without a foreign player right now. Still waiting for Daniel Palka to complete quarantine, though presumably that's happening soon. Just not enough depth in that lineup. Rotation is a bunch of mediocre guys at best who are pitching above their heads early, and they're regressing back to expectations of late. So not a ton. They weren't very good last year. They weren't very good to start the year. So I'd be surprised if they suddenly made a late push.
Well, they do have Daniel Palka hopefully joining them. I don't think he'll give them the Addison Russell level of production, but you never know. Bright spot for them, like you said, falling back to their skill level. So now moving on to the daily lineups now here on rotowire.com on our KBO tab right there. We take a look. We have Aaron Brooks facing off against that very hot LG Twins team that AJ thinks maybe could do it all here. Some little party emojis. But they'll be facing off against Aaron Brooks, who's been good, but outside his last start, it's actually been kind of bad. What do you think about this game tonight?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. This whole slate actually is quite pitching heavy. I think last time we talked, I picked the overs on everything. I don't think that ended up happening, but there was a whole bunch of shaky pitchers going that time. It's a whole bunch of really good ones. Today it was hard to find pitchers to stack against and hard to figure out which pitchers to not include. I think this time we've got, it's 5 of the top 11 in strikeout rate, and Brooks and Lim are 2 of those guys. Brooks is 8th in strikeout rate, and Chen-Q Lim is 4th. So we've got potential for a lot of strikeouts and not a ton of runs in this one. Brooks, he had 13 straight starts with 3 or fewer earned runs before his last time out, which I believe was his worst start of the year. I think his previous worst start, he'd only allowed 4 earned runs. So unlike some of these guys, your David Buchanan's, who occasionally give up 10, he had never been close. So this was, his worst outing of the year in terms of runs, although you look at the strikeouts to walks, 8-1. That's pretty good. Interestingly, both of these pitchers have faced the opposing team in each of their last 2 starts. I don't know if we've ever seen something like that, 3 straight against the same team. In Brooks's case, it seemed like the Twins figured him out. Again, at least in terms of the runs, he was still striking out plenty. In Chen-Q Lim's case, it was actually the opposite. He had an extended strong run. What was it for him? 2.02 ERA in his last 5. That's even including 2 times ago against these Tigers. They knocked him around previous time, or 2 starts ago. And then his last start, 5 scoreless innings, and not just scoreless innings, hitless innings with 9 strikeouts. So wow. It's quite a turnaround. So both of them basically flip-flopped their performances. Both have been pretty good for most of the year. Brooks has been better, but he's facing a stronger lineup in the Twins, so it should be a very good game, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is concerning when you see a team face a pitcher 3 times, and now on the second, or previously on the second, you see them figure him out and have his worst start on the entire year. Because I was shocked when Aaron Brooks didn't have a quality start against this Twins team. He's getting his strikeouts, but we could maybe see another night of Aaron Brooks, the mediocre, the average pitcher, not quite the dominant one. In terms of the offense that he's going to be facing, who's the leader here? Roberto Ramos was someone that a lot of people looked to early on. Who do you look to now that could really have a multi-hit game against Brooks?
Hyun-Soo Kim has been very reliable throughout the year and throughout his career, really. Hasn't really had many extended slumps at all. In the month of August, he's hitting 380 with an OPS of 1076, and that's really not high above his season-long numbers. He's hitting 347 with a 987 OPS over the course of the year. He's been a great contact guy throughout his career in Korea, but he's hitting more homers this year. He had only 11 last season. He's got 17 this year. So I think is the best hitter on the team. I think Roberto Ramos has been mediocre for long enough that I think Kim pretty clearly claims that title. He was good enough to make the jump over to the States. Didn't go all that well for him. But he was a league average hitter with the Orioles and Phillies. It's just when you're a league average hitter and a below average defender who only plays the outfield corners or DH, you don't necessarily stick around in the big leagues. But his bat played over here, so he's been an excellent, reliable contact hitter for a very long time in Korea, and he's still that guy.
Yeah, 380 in the month of August. Definitely something to watch out for tonight to potentially give Aaron Brooks some more problems. And hey, maybe even a worse start than last time. But in terms of the Tigers offense, Preston Tucker, he got the day off unusually on Sunday, the last game, however you count those from the time zone. Who are we looking at offensively for the Tigers against Lim?
It would be Tucker. I think there was no reports that it was an injury or anything. I think pretty often when stars get an off day, I've noticed that it's been Sunday just so they get those 2 days off in a row. I don't have the data to back that up, but it certainly felt that way. And he's not on his hottest of hot streaks, but he's certainly not been cold. Again, for him in the month of August, well, maybe it does count as a hot streak. I hadn't checked his numbers after his last game because he now has an OPS of 1099 in August over 12 games. So he's been quite good for most of the year, occasional slumps, but I think he's somebody who's usable today. Again, since basically all the pitchers are good, you're basically going to have to construct a daily fantasy roster that includes some hitters going against some good pitchers. And I did recommend Cheng-Kyu Lim today, partly because the Tigers overall aren't great, and he's been quite good lately. But if you're not including him, Tucker, I think is a fine play. Jung-Woo Choi pairs nicely with him. Also gets the platoon advantage, hits right after him.
Yeah, so some good batters, but maybe not the best because he is facing your number 2 guy on the cheat sheet. And Lim, let's get a winner here. Twins, Tigers. Do the Twins extend their push for that number 1 spot in the standings and in the power rankings, or do the Tigers gain some ground in the bubble playoff spot hunt?
I am going to pick the Twins. I don't feel all that confident about it. I like both pitchers. I like Brooks more, but I really like the way the Twins have been playing. They have a considerably better lineup than the Tigers. I think that difference is bigger than the difference in pitching, but not by very much. And again, the fact that Lim just absolutely shut these guys down last time, whereas Brooks struggled just 1 start, but I think that's another small data point that's going to slightly tilt things towards the Twins for me. Certainly wouldn't argue too hard against anybody who wants to pick Aaron Brooks, though.
Yeah, taking the team that's facing Aaron Brooks. You don't see that too often, but that just means the Twins team is quite good. So moving on now, we have a comment here about Kiwoom against NC. Heroes, Dinos. We'll pause on the Eagles, Wyverns. We'll skip them and head on over to that Dinos game as courtesy of Double Up. We got Rosinski. Do I dare say this is his most important start of the year? I mean, the way he's been looking recently, it's going to be a concern if he can anchor this team, if he's anything in this form going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I mean, the Dinos haven't had their top spot threatened since, I don't even know if it was threatened ever in June. It might have, I think not since like mid-May. They've had a pretty comfortable lead for basically the entire season, and it's just half a game now. If they lose, they will not be first anymore, and I think that's going to maybe cause some panic in Changwon. Brzezinski needs to be the leader of this rotation until they get Chang Moku back. And again, forearm issue for Chang Moku, not what you want to hear. I don't know for certain the severity of it, but Brzezinski has to be that guy. And he was good enough to be that guy for most teams for most of the year. Through his first 14 starts, it was a 1.99 ERA and a 1.08 WHIP. That's competes with everybody. That's right up there with the Dan Straleys of the world. And then his last three, a 7.88 ERA and a 1.88 WHIP. One of those starts was decent, but it came against the Eagles. Just 10 strikeouts to 7 walks in those last three, too. So it's definitely worrisome, and he's facing a hot and good team in the Heroes. So I did not recommend him on the cheat sheet today, which is rare for Drew Rosinski. I could see having faith in the bounce back here, but it's hard to be too confident in him, given the way he's done the last couple. I mean, 8 runs against the Giants. It was during the Giants' very hot streak, but I mean, even the Giants at their best aren't an elite offense in this league. So it's a worrisome set of outings there for sure.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern I have with Rosinski is going back to that Doosan game. It was on ESPN. I think I recorded and watched it the morning after. Didn't stay up for that one, but he looked very tired, like really sweaty. Like from the beginning, he didn't look that strong. Ended up having an okay start, what we thought was okay, a bad start, but not a horrible start. But now when we look at these strikeout to walk numbers right now, it's telling a really bad story that something could be wrong. 0 strikeouts against Lotte. I mean, they're hot, but they're going to strike out at some point. Do you think maybe an injury is coming with Rosinski, or do you think it's more just bad luck, fluke type stretch?
Yeah, never want to say for sure that a guy's injured, but if a guy is injured, pitching through something minor, this would be what it looks like. It wouldn't surprise me if we hear something soon, but it could just be a mechanical something or tiredness or something, as you said. It's a long season, even if it's slightly shorter over there. Yeah, 0 strikeouts, 2 walks, and 2 hit batters in the last outing too. It's not what you want to see. Not what you want to see going into a very key game against the Heroes. So I would be quite nervous to put him in my DFS lineup, and I wouldn't shy away from the Heroes against him either, which is pretty odd to say.
Yeah, I like Drew Rosinski. Sent out a tweet about him last night. Number 40 on the field, number 1 in wins on the year, and number 1 in our hearts. But right now, probably not going to take him tonight against the Heroes. What can you tell us about Kiwoom starter Han Hee Han? Not a great ERA, but he's on this powerful Heroes team that is maybe looking for a little revenge and looking to snag that number 1 spot in the standings. Can he be enough for the Heroes to defeat Rosinski and the Dinos?
Yeah, he's had a real adventure of a year. He was a starter early in his career. He was exclusively a reliever last year. And whether or not the conversion back to the rotation is working, kind of depends when in the year you're looking. In his first 8 starts, it was a 4.47 ERA, which is a passable mid-rotation guy, nothing you get too excited about. Then of his next 2 starts, his 9th and 10th starts of the year, a 41.73 ERA and a 6.27 WHIP. He got just 3.2 total innings and 17 earned runs over those 2 starts to kick off July. That's hard to do. And then suddenly he came back and has been great. Over his last 5 starts, it's a 3.45 ERA with 1 bad one, 5 of those runs coming in 1 start. That means 4 of his last 5 starts he's given up 2 earned runs or less. And yeah, over that 5-start stretch, it's a 3.45 ERA, and even more impressive, it's a 0.86 WHIP because he's barely walking anybody. He's almost unhittable, kind of completely out of nowhere. In his previous seasons, he wasn't this good either. So it's a bit of a mystery. On the season overall, he's basically an average strikeout rate guy and a low walk guy, but he's suddenly striking out people recently, though I guess not necessarily in his last couple starts. He's not somebody I'd be confident starting against the Dinos. Even the struggling Dinos still have a pretty good lineup. But given his recent performance, I think he gives the Heroes a shot in this one.
Wow. I mean, I was not expecting this. If you told me, in the beginning of the year that, Rosinski facing the Heroes and Han Hee Han, that you would not be taking and not obviously be taking Rosinski and the Dinos. I mean, this KBO season continues to be a roller coaster. Man, what do you think of these offenses, though? I feel like an over could be coming here because of Rosinski's struggles and because Han isn't proven in terms of the entire longevity of the season. How do you feel about that over, 9.5 runs?
Yeah, I mean, it really could go either way. It's two very strong offenses. The Dinos haven't necessarily been at their best lately. Given the way Han has pitched lately, given the way Ruchinski has pitched at times, there's a pretty strong case for the under there. Given the way Han pitched for most of the year and the way Ruchinski's pitched lately, pretty strong case for the over. I think I may side over just because you need one offense to go off, and when they go off, they have the potential to really go off. And also, even if Ruchinski's good, the Dinos bullpen, extremely sketchy. Which means could easily see Ruchinski giving up, say, 2 in 7 innings, and then the Heroes winning 6-5 or something. I think it's sad, funny, whatever the word for that is, that the Dinos acquired a reliever who then immediately was as bad as the Dinos relievers. They traded for Kyung Chan Moon from the Tigers, who we talked about last time, was an all-star closer in 2019, had issues with the homer this year, and was available on the trade market. And then he promptly gave up 4 runs on 2 homers and recorded just a single out in his first appearance for the Dinos last week. So it's they just are not having any luck in that bullpen.
Yeah, and you can see that bringing down their entire overall pitching numbers. Offense, top 3. Pitching, pulling that down to about mediocre in terms of runs per game, ranking 5th at just a tick over 5 runs a game. Who's your pick here then? You going to go with the Heroes, Addison Russell, and that offense against the struggling Rosinski?
I think his struggles have been scary enough that I am going to pick the Heroes. I think given the recent form for both teams, again, it's 4 wins in their last 15 for the Dinos, and they're facing the team that I think is the best team in the league. They were pretty uncompetitive in that Twin Series too. They were only lost by 1 in that last game, but this is not the Dinos team that we're used to. This is seemingly not the Drew Ruchinski that we're used to. So I am going to side Heroes and over. It's a very real possibility that the Dinos win this one like 10-1. They have that potential in their offense, and Ruchinski has that potential in his arm. But yeah, it's just too divergent recent form for me to not pick the Heroes, I think.
Yeah, when you look at all that red, that sea of red here on rotowire.com, yeah, this Dinos team is struggling. That sweep, of course, by the Twins to finish off last week, especially disappointing. So you like the over, you like the Heroes. Going back now, following on our trend here, just going down the line here. Quickly, we'll talk about the Eagles and Wyverns. You don't have to spend much time on them. The pitchers are actually a little interesting here in terms of the recent success, but it's the Eagles and the Wyverns, so I don't know how much we can really expect from them.
Yeah, actually, again, like basically every pitcher on this slate is pretty interesting. Again, this is Jung-Hoon Park is 5th among qualified starters in strikeout rate. Min-Woo Kim is 11th. There's 11 guys who are striking out at least 20% of opposing batters, and we have 5 of them here on this slate. And both of them pitching well lately, too. Min-Woo Kim, a 3.05 ERA over his last 4 starts. Though it's worth noting that comes with 15 strikeouts and 14 walks. So there definitely seems to be some good luck in that stretch. But, hard to complain about a 3.05 ERA. Jung-Hoon Park for the Wyverns, it's 7 straight starts with no more than 3 earned runs. It's a 3.49 ERA and a 1.29 WHIP over that stretch. Both guys are pretty similar in terms of their statistical profiles overall. They're high strikeout, high walk guys, so tough to hit, but don't necessarily know where the ball is going. But tough to hit might win out against 2 lineups that have quite a tough time hitting. So I would definitely expect an under here. It's 2 pitchers that aren't elite, but there's something to both of them. And there's 2 lineups that there's essentially nothing to either. So definitely the under. Would be pretty happy to start either guy as a cheap option on DraftKings. But obviously neither pitcher is elite, so it's a chance that they blow up. But given their recent forms and the lineups they're facing, I think they're both going to be pretty strong options.
Yeah, well, and with both offenses, ranking the bottom half overall, because it is the Eagles and the Wyverns here, I like that under as well. Is there anyone in the lineup that maybe scares you? I mean, Jamie Romack, didn't do great while they were being swept last week, but he still did have a couple hits. He's hit in the middle of the lineup again tonight. Him with Jong Choi, are they still a decent unit that maybe would scare you away from that under?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's enough overall to scare me away from the under, but I did recommend Jung Choi in my cheat sheet today. He was struggling pretty hard when the Wyverns were struggling pretty hard at the start of the month, but he had a hit in all 6 games last week, 988 OPS last week, drove in 7 runs. He's very good. He's been very good for a long time, one of KBO's all-time home run leaders. So if anyone does something, I would expect it to be him. But I would definitely agree, stick with the unders, especially the unders against these starting pitchers. The only good thing, seemingly, about these 2 teams is that they occasionally have a decent starting pitcher. We got 2 respectable ones going today. I think we could see a pretty low score.
I like it, taking the under. And quickly, who would you side with here? Eagles versus Wyverns.
I guess the Eagles, as weird as it feels. The Wyverns have been even worse lately. And Min-Woo Kim has been slightly better than Jung-Hoon Park over the course of the year, but there's little to separate those 2 and little to separate the 2 lineups. You could side Wyverns because the Eagles are without Brandon Barnes right now. It's a hamstring issue, I think, meaning their lineup's even worse than it normally is. So I wouldn't hate going that way, but I'll side with recent form and go Eagles, but not by much.
Taking the Eagles, and you're picking against the Dinos. Crazy things happen here on KBO Chats Live. We're coming up on time, but we got 2 great series to finishing up. Well, one great one less great. But the great one here, Dan Straley going against the Deucin Bears, seeing if this Giants team can continue their hot streak. It was cooled down a little bit last week, but this is another chance for them to prove themselves and take that number 5 spot and enter the playoff picture. Is this just a Dan Straley game? Are we just going to go Giants all the way here?
I think that's where I'm at. I think the Giants are favored against pretty much anybody with Dan Straley on the mound. The Bears have been a 500 team for something like 41 games, I think was the stat. They've been below 500 over their last 41. It's pretty mediocre for quite some time. And Dan Straley is the best pitcher in the league right now. His last 7 starts, a 1.34 ERA and an 0.91 WHIP. Over the entire season, he's allowed more than 2 earned runs just twice. He's second in the league in ERA, WHIP, and strikeout rate. Running out of ways to describe how good he is, but there's no better pitcher in the KBO right now. I'd be very surprised if he isn't back in a major league camp next spring, assuming he wants to come back. I think he's done everything he can to prove that he's still got something in the arsenal. So,
yeah, that's saying a lot considering he had a rough year with the Orioles just this time last year. But boy, 1 year in the KBO, not even a full year, whereas we're only halfway through August, and he's already proving, he's MVP level talent, and he's ready to go for a major league contract with basically any club in Major League Baseball. The Bears' offense, I do, of course, see that as the strongest part of their team. The pitching is definitely not there, especially with Flexen out and Alcantara not starting tonight. Jose Fernandez, though, had a couple of cold games last week. Jael a little better. But what do we make of this Bears offense and a lineup that pretty much we compared to the Dinos a little earlier in the season?
Yeah, I would obviously stay away from all of them tonight, I think, against Straley. Overall, I would still have enough faith in them. I think they're good pitchers. They're good hitters, are allowed to have slumps every now and then. They have fallen down to third in scoring. They were sitting second for quite a long time. So that's yet another reason to side with Straley and the Giants in this one. Yeah, they scored 3 or fewer runs in 3 of their last 4 games against teams like the Lions and Wiz. Not ideal. Wouldn't think it's much more than a small slump, but I would expect that slump to continue for at least one more game here.
Yeah, with Straley on the bump, you don't expect too much. And Jose Miguel Fernandez hasn't homered this entire month, as you can see here on rotowire.com. 0 home runs, both 0 home and 0 away. So you can select that tool on the site here. Total also going to go with the under. It's set at 9.7 to 9.5. Or do the Giants offense maybe have enough to do it on their own?
I think they'd have to do almost all of it on their own, because I'd be surprised if Straley gives up more than 2. He doesn't really do that. And I'm not sure. The Giants could get to 8. They've done that in the recent past. Wanjun Chua is pretty unremarkable. He's been a reliever most of the year. I had one spot start early, then he's had 5 starts in a row since Chris Flexen's been out with a broken foot. He started with 2 good ones, 1 earned run in his first 2 in that stretch, but now he's given up 10 in 14.2 innings over his last 3. So not a whole lot there. He seems like at best he might be a passable back-end fill-in, which, Giants on the whole, not a great offense, but they've been playing better lately. Even though they're heavily right-handed, I think they should have an easy enough time against Choi. They were actually one of my recommendations for a stack tonight. Choi is maybe a better pitcher than most guys I would recommend stacking against, and the Giants are a worse lineup than I normally would. But I've said very positive things about almost every pitcher on this slate. So a mediocre one like Choi seems like one of the most exploitable to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. He is 6-0 though. If you do look at his little player card though, so you read into it a little bit more, you see he's not that good as seen by the ERA and WHIP, but 6 wins, something there. So moving on now, final series as we are running up on time here. The Wiz and the Lions. William Cuevas back on the bump, taking on Samsung at home. Mel Rojas Jr., Becco Gong. I'm thinking this is another easy one, all Wiz, and maybe even a sweep. The Lions have not been good recently.
Yeah, the reason you wouldn't go in that direction is Cuevas hasn't been good recently either. His last 3 starts, it's a 6.35 ERA, 1.68 WHIP, and maybe even more worryingly, a 5-9 strikeout to walk ratio. Not good at all over those 3, and 2 of those against the Wyverns. The first one of that stretch, he left early with dizziness. He came right back and made his next start, but his next 2 were mediocre or worse. No indication that there's a long-term problem there, but it's a bit of a worry. He's had his bad stretches earlier in the year, though that was linked to injury. But he hasn't been great lately, though neither have the Lions. So betting on Cuevas to bounce back in this one doesn't seem like a terrible idea. Chae-Hung Choi on the other side was quite good before his last start, at least in ERA and WHIP. And then he went and gave up 11 runs on 17 hits. I think that's how bad it was. That's hard to do. It's hard to be allowed to give up 11 runs. So a little bit worrisome there. Just one bad start, but that's about as bad as it gets. I don't know if I'm going to see a pitcher give up 17 hits again in my lifetime. 0 strikeouts, 17 hits. It's not what you want. And this game's at Daegu Samsung Lions Park, to most hitter-friendly park in the league. So you get two pitchers who've been struggling lately, or struggling in his last one start by Choi, but he struggled poorly enough that I bet his ERA still looks bad if you go back to his last 4 or 5 starts. And Choi, pretty mediocre overall numbers. That one bad start has sent his ERA more or less back up to where it should be. He's a slightly below average strikeout guy, average walk guy, nothing too much there. So I think the Wiz should have an easy time with him. So I am going to side with them. Their lineup considerably better than the Lions. Cuevas is normally better than Choi. But again, Cuevas' recent stretch could give cause to pick the Lions. I just don't see. You'd have to also be quite confident in Choi, I think, to pick him, because even Cuevas not at his best might still be good enough.
Yeah, cold Cuevas against just a bad Choi. He did face Doosan in both his last starts, so maybe you give him a little bit of a breather, and only had one walk in that big explosion, but still. Yeah, you got to question what the manager was thinking at that point. 17 hits. You're pitching to contact. I don't see that as a great strategy, especially when we see what Mel Rojas Jr. can get up to. Had a pretty great hitting streak, maybe a little colder recently in that Bears stretch. I was a little concerned by seeing 2 straight hitless games, especially when he had 5+ plate appearances in each. Is that a worry for you if you're going to build your lineup around the presumed MVP, Mel Rojas Jr.?
It can't not be a worry. It was his first week, I think, with an OPS below 1,000 in, I didn't check how long that streak was run to, but it had to be about 15 or so weeks where he had an OPS of 1,000 or more in each week. And it was like 400 or something last week. It's a slump. Hitters are, in fact, allowed to slump. We hadn't seen Rojas do that at all. It's going to take more than 5-6 games for me to be all that worried. I did still include him on my Wiz stack that I recommended. I did think about it for a second because he is so expensive. It's a little bit hard to select somebody so expensive who's been on that kind of slump. But man, I think what he did over his first 75 games, whatever it was, that still matters more to me than what he did over his last 5. So not going to be too worried just yet. If he goes the rest of this Lions series with only 1-2 more hits, then maybe we start to worry. But I'm gonna forgive a guy 1 5-game stretch.
Well, all right, that's fair. They are allowed to go on little streaks. I expect more from Rojas, though, considering he can hit an 8-game hitting streak. But I'm expecting a bounce back. I really want to see a bounce back and see him secure that MVP trophy. So that's all 5 series tonight. Went a little long, but we broke down 8 each team. I think some pretty good prediction and stats, as Double Up here mentions. In the power rankings, breaking down each team. If you missed any of it, you can check out the replay on YouTube and Periscope. But before we go, Eric, what are your top 3 picks for tonight on this very pitcher-heavy slate?
Yeah, I think the tops are probably going to be mostly some unders. Let's see. I actually think the Giants might be number 1. Picking the Bears to lose as the top pick is weird, but it's Dan Straley. It's one of the only not even pitching matches. So I think I will go Giants as number 1. I think I might go Wiz number 2. I wish that Cuevas was pitching better, but the Wiz on the whole have been so much better than the Lions. For number 3, I might go with the under in that Tigers-Twins game. I think that's probably the best combined pairing of pitchers. The Twins have been hot enough that they could cause issues there like they did for Brooks' last time. But I don't think he's going to be that bad 2 times in a row. So I think I'll go with that. This is number 3, although it is a pretty low under, and the Twins have been hot. But again, I think Aaron Brooks and Cheng-Yu Lim is quite a pitching matchup.
It is a low under. I'm a little concerned with that pick just because the Twins have now seen Brooks now going to be the third time in a row for Brooks. A little concerning there. I thought you were going to go with that Eagles Wyverns under because Kim and Park have been pretty solid recently. I know it's weird to say that two pitchers on the Eagles and the Wyverns have been good recently, but hey, you picked against the Bears, so the KBO, our preconceptions are just thrown out the window now.
Yeah, that one would have been my number 4 if I was deciding between those two. But yeah, picking against the Bears, everything's crazy. Somebody tweeted at me in response to my power rankings, "This is wrong. You are dumb." Because I put the Dinos not first and the Eagles not last. I have to say that I felt quite good about that. I've been wanting somebody to tweet at me, "You are dumb," for years now. I feel like I've finally made it as a writer. I've getting people to say, "This is wrong. You are dumb." So thank you to Uncle Buck.
There you go.
Welcome anyone else who wants to say this is wrong, you are dumb, to both of us anytime. Well, I can't speak for you, but it meant a lot to me. Anyone else, feel free. We are wrong and dumb very often. So
yeah, that's the official stamp of a good Twitter account. Of course, when you get the trolls on there, you know you're doing something right. So that's going to be all the games for today. One last thing, though, I should mention. I did see some tweets saying that some fans are not going to be in attendance in games. I don't know how long that's exactly lasting. But I did note that for 3 straight nights finishing up that week, only 2 home teams won. One of those was the Eagles, which was weird. But I'm wondering how that no fans aspect is now going to feed into, these 2-game series coming down to August. We can talk more about this in the next show, but I just think that's something to look out for, is how that impacts these totals and these teams going forward.
Right, that's an interesting call. Definitely something to keep an eye on.
All right, and you can follow us on Twitter at RotoWireKBO and our personal accounts at SportsByPasco and at Eric_Halterman. Peace, guys.
Thanks for coming, everybody.